Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar for today on Oracle Forms 12c and beyond, the new features sneak peek. Next slide. So, Michael, you could take it away with your safe harbor statement.
Thank you, Mia. As many of you are probably familiar with, this is Oracle Standards Safe Harbor Statement. If you take just a moment to read through it, I'll cover it briefly. Essentially, we'll be covering some material in these slides which will refer to dates, potential new features, and other similar information. Bear in mind that this is all just informational exchanges. None of this is a guarantee that new features or dates will be met when we go to production. And back to Mia. Mia, if you take just a second to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so hi everybody. I'm Mia Ehrman. I'm the CEO of OraPlayer. I'm also an Oracle ACE Director in the area of Forms and mobile, which might seem strange to some of you to be an ACE Director in the oldest product and the newest products, but I see a really easy way of joining the two worlds with our solution called OraPlayer. Next slide. Basically what we've been doing with our product is we are able to take Oracle Forms business processes and wrap them as web services to be able to run them from any device. That could be mobile devices, ADF pages, Apex applications, for integration purposes, for deployment on mobile devices, for integration with cloud services. So that way you basically have the same Oracle Forms system that's able to run on many user interfaces and many devices. And we do this with a wizard without needing to redevelop the form, without needing to QA the business logic, because all of the Forms business logic is still running on the Forms server in the middleware where it belongs, and no development had to take place in Java or the database or both. You didn't have to, reverse engineer these really complex form systems. You're able to run the same use cases you run in Forms today, but just from different user interfaces or with no user interface via a web service. But enough about OraPlayer. I wanted to introduce Michael. First of all, thank him for joining us and really giving us a sneak peek into his new functionality, right? Not my functionality, but the incredible things he's putting into Oracle Forms to make this product viable and really enrich it for the future. And we really want to thank him for always supporting the Forms community and being a great advocate for us within Oracle to get us these new features and really bring the product forward as we've seen this huge jump in the past few years. So thank you very much. And Michael, back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mia. Just to make a few things clear, although we may refer to a particular version like 12, a lot of this stuff is in kind of prototype mode and may not necessarily be in 12. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of quickly go through the product roadmap. We're going to talk about features, as I started to say, not necessarily for version 12, but version 12 and beyond version 12. And yes, I mean beyond version 12. We do have plans to continue on past 12. We're going to do our best to get as much plugged into version 12 as we can, and whatever doesn't make it into 12 will work in the next version. At the moment, we're potentially looking at a number of new features that exceeds the last 3 versions combined, so we're looking really good. So again, we'll talk about the new features. And then, like you see in most of these slide presentations, we're going to share some contact information, and hopefully as you guys get questions, maybe you want to share tips or whatever, you're certainly welcome to do that in one of those potential places. And then as time permits, we'll have a Q&A. So let's take a quick look at the roadmap. We're not going to dwell on it too long, but I just want to kind of remind everyone where we are and kind of where we're going. Back in about the 2009 timeframe, mid-year, we released version 11, release 1, or 11.1.1. Like most of our products, it came with 5 years of Premier support and 3 years of extended support. Unfortunately, version 11 release 1 has already reached its end of life for Premier support. It was a quick 5 years, and it certainly was a great one. However, release 2 fortunately brought us some great new features. Same holds true. It will hold 5 years of Premier support, which will take us into October of 2016. The difference here compared to other products is that extended support was reduced originally to October of 2017. We are planning on extending those dates just slightly. We're going to make a little bit of an adjustment. We're going to push out hopefully the Premier date just a little bit, and then the extended support date hopefully will get extended at least a year, if not more, in order to allow everybody time to get onto version 12 once it's released. Okay. So speaking of version 12, it is tentatively planned to be released sometime this calendar year. Exactly when is kind of undecided. It's a little bit of a moving target right now. But the plan is sometime this year we'll roll out version 12. And like all of our previous versions, it should come with 5 years of Premier support and then 3 years of extended support beyond that. So cool stuff. Here's a real snapshot from the lifetime support policy, just to give you a little bit more detail of exactly what I was speaking of. These are the Premier and extended dates that are relevant to the versions we have available. As you can see on there, June 2014 was the end of Premier support for 11 release 1, and into October 16 we'll take release 2. And like I said, the release 2 dates are subject to change to your benefit here shortly. So let's take a look at some features. Again, what I want to start to do is I want to take a look at actually some of the existing features before we jump into what's coming. And the importance of this actually comes from a lot of the questions that I've received from customers both on the phone and emails and forums and face-to-face at conferences. I understand that the tool, any development tool, is just always so complex. There's always so much to them. It doesn't matter how old or how new the tool is. There's always features in it that you tend to overlook or didn't know anything about. And the truth is a lot of those less than frequently used features are probably the most valuable ones in the context of being efficient in what you're doing. So let's take a look at some of those really quickly. And some of you might actually be wowed. Others may say, well, I already knew that. But let's kind of share the information around. So just a quick look at some of the features we've plugged in over the past few versions. In specific, the ones that are highlighted in red are ones that have a UI effect to them, or something that could potentially adjust or alter the way the end user sees the application. The other features that are listed here are mostly features that relate to the infrastructure and are not necessarily something that an end user would be impacted by. The importance of me highlighting the UI features or the end user related features is simply because I've seen a lot of customers take their old applications, whether they came from version 6 or even 3 and they moved eventually to a web-based form in version 9 or 10 or even 11, and all they've done over the years is just regenerate their form. The downside to that is you're not taking advantage of any of the new features, of which many could be introduced into your application fairly easily with very low risk, if any at all. So I want to encourage everybody as we go from version to version, at bare minimum, at least look at the documentation, take a look at what new features were delivered, and see if you could somehow use those to add value to your application. I'm sure the end users would appreciate that. And at the end of the day, if it helps them to work more efficiently, of course, having the end users save time with whatever it is they're doing is always valuable to everybody. Okay? So again, let's take a look at some of the existing ones. So one of the common problems that I find myself dealing with often is I don't like to type, as interesting as that is. So if I could find a fast way of getting information into my application, I would much rather do that than have to type out a whole sentence or a whole word. If I could just click a button and have a word pre-fill for me, I'm a happy camper. So let's take a look at what we have today. In the builder on the property palette, there is an option, an inherit option, that allows you to reset a property back to its default value. The advantage of that, obviously, is in this particular example, if I've hard-coded a canvas color to white, In this particular example, the downside of this is the application does not get to take advantage of the color scheme that's used at runtime. So if, for example, in this case, the color scheme is set to blue, the background color would have been blue had I have not hard-coded the color white. Well, unfortunately, the only way that you could reset that white value back to the default value is to type in, bracket, unspecified bracket, which personally to me is a lot of typing. All that's necessary in this particular case is to simply hit the inherit button, which is at the top of the property palette, and the value will be reset back to unspecified without you having to type anything. And the result at runtime in this example, which is not relevant to what I'm talking about, but what would happen now at runtime with a value of unspecified as a background color is the application's canvas would pick up whatever color scheme you were using. So if we switch to the red color scheme, you would see that the canvas would pick up the red color scheme and so on through all the color schemes. So that's kind of nice. It gives the end user the ability to kind of control the look and feel of their application without dealing with that hard-coded coloring. Okay. So in a future version, what we're hoping to do is make it so that you could select more than one attribute and reset it back to its default. In the current version, for those of you sitting in front of your own machine playing with the builder right now as I do this, currently you could only use the inherit button for one property at a time. Going forward, what the hope is that we will be able to implement a way in which you could pick and choose which ones are not default values, select them, and then with one click they would all reset back to the default. So effectively cutting down the number of clicks to however many properties you've chosen, and then one click of the inherit button. So again, time saving is the goal here. Another great one. How many times have you wished you could have two PL SQL editors open at the same time so that you could compare code or copy and paste code or any other variation of that? Maybe you want to review the code in two different triggers, see how similar they are, how dissimilar they are, how they work together. Common question that I hear all the time. In fact, generally the way the question starts is, hey Mike, what's it going to take to get a tabbed code editor in Forms so that we could look at more than one trigger at a time? Well, that functionality actually has been there for at least 4 or 5 versions now, but a lot of people just don't know it. So today, all you have to do in version 11 and older is simply find the second trigger that you want to open, hold the Shift key down, and double mouse click on it. Not that mouse, this other mouse. That mouse. And once you click on the once you double mouse click, what you'll end up with is 2 PL SQL editors open. Now you could do this over and over again. You don't necessarily have to limit yourself to 2. If you want 3 PL SQL editors open, or 4 or 5, or however many your machine could support, you could open up as many as you need in order to go through the code. This is a really helpful feature, especially with the more complex applications. Okay. This is the one that probably will wow most people, because I know many people aren't familiar with this. How many times have you had a procedure, a trigger, a program unit, whatever the case is, that's potentially hundreds of lines long, and at the very beginning of it, maybe you've set various constants or some other piece of code that adds value to the code down at the bottom? Well, the problem is you can't look at the top and the bottom at the same time. However, yes you can. This PL SQL editor has sizing handles to be adjusted so that you could adjust this editor vertically or horizontally, as well as show the console at the bottom, the one that normally shows compilation errors. So check this out. This is really cool. By using the vertical sizing handle, you could actually split the single editor into effectively 2 editors at once. The code is the same. It's all the same trigger code, but the difference is if you look closely at the line numbers, in the top half of this example, I'm looking at the first 11 lines of code, and in the bottom half, I'm looking at from line 191 down to 204, and each section has its own scroll bars. Same trigger, just different area of the code I'm managing at once. Pretty helpful with big triggers. On the left-hand corner, the bottom left-hand corner, you could also slide horizontally, and you could actually split your code into 4 pieces. So now you could really go all over the place with it. Again, the goal here is to work efficiently. Too often I hear about organizations that don't have the time to make updates to their application. There's just not enough hours in the day. Again, if we could find ways to make the tools work better for you and with you, then hopefully we'll reduce some of that concern about time. Okay. Similar is true of the Object Navigator. Now this is kind of an area where you're less likely, I would think, to need this unless you're copying and pasting from one module to another. Again, same or similar sizing handles. You could split this horizontally or vertically. In this particular example, I don't know if you can see it or not, but on the top half I'm showing some information from Module 1, and in the bottom half, Module 2 is also open, but you can see that at the bottom. Again, the information isn't replicated, it's just duplicated, or not, I guess duplicated is the best way of describing it. So if, for example, you wanted to copy an object out of Module 2 and paste it into Module 1, rather than scrolling up and down in between the two forms, you could do this all in one visual space. Okay. So again, as I mentioned, one of the things we want to encourage or deliver as a message as we talk about upgrading from old versions to new versions is to try to take advantage of the features that each version delivers. Some of them may add no value to your application, but others may offer some real value that really should be considered. So one of the things we've talked about a lot is this idea of integrating with other technologies. So on the left-hand side, I don't know if anyone recognizes it or not, but that's actually a little bit of a modernized version of the old Summit demo, which was created back in the 1990s sometime. In this particular example, what it's trying to describe here is this idea that from the Forms application, you could call out to other applications, for example, an ADF application or an Apex application, or even somebody else's technology, Google Maps, for example. So that's kind of a neat way of doing that. In this particular example, we talk about using JavaScript to take advantage of client-side functionality. So in this particular case, on the hire date field, you might have a JavaScript calendar. And the advantage of JavaScript is that that JavaScript code all executes on the client side. So the amount of network traffic is reduced, and the speed at which the UI component of this is rendered is much faster because it's all on the client side. So here again is an example of a JavaScript calendar on the right working with a hire date field in the form. So working with two technologies at the same time, kind of cool. There's this idea of visual integration. If you have a portal page or an ADF page, or it doesn't really matter, any kind of a standard web page, you could relatively easily integrate a Forms application in that page. But the neat thing is, in version 11, we added the JavaScript integration. Because of that, you actually could send information in and out of the form out to the surrounding web page. So if the web page, for example, has, I don't know, a first name and a last name text field, you could easily pass that information into the form if it makes sense to do that. Or vice versa, you could have information sent from the form out to the surrounding HTML page. And those two applications can then work together nicely. Now, the one thing that you do see on this application, the Forms application part of this, is all the window dressings. So the menu bar and the toolbar and the actual window itself is all seen here. That actually could be removed with an applet parameter called GUI-mode, G-U-I-M-O-D-E, which was actually added in 11G release 2. I don't have a picture of it here, but it's actually kind of a neat way to add Forms applications into a web page and give it somewhat of a seamless look so that the Forms module doesn't look like a unique module to the form or to the web page. It looks like part of the web page. And the other way that integration could be leveraged, again with the newer versions, is, for example, taking advantage of the database advance, or advanced queuing as we like to call it. In version 11 of Forms, we added integration with the database's advanced queuing feature, which is really neat if you want to integrate with other applications, which may or may not even be in context with the Forms application. Basically put, it's kind of like instant messenger. From Forms, I send a message down to the database's advanced queue, and anybody that's subscribing to that particular event would receive the message. That could be another Forms application. It could be an ADF application. It doesn't really matter. It could be anybody that has the ability to integrate with advanced queuing would be able to receive and send messages to advanced queuing and react to those. Same with Forms. From an ADF application, you send a message to the advanced queue. and then the Forms picks up that message from Advanced Queue and reacts to it accordingly. And the last reference on there is to web services. That functionality has actually existed since version 6 of Forms, specifically 6.08, when web-based. So if you're running your application web-based, the ability to integrate with web services has always been there, not necessarily directly to web services, but through a Java interface that you would develop and use as imported Java in your Forms application. So kind of cool stuff that already exists out there. There's no reason that your application that was designed in the 1980s or 1990s should still look like an application that looked like it came from the 1990s. There's plenty of ways to modernize those applications. Let's take a quick look at some color options. So how many people remember what this looks like? This is an old Forms application, particularly in this case running in 1998. It came from a user guide out of Oracle support from a system that we used to use to manage customer service requests. I joke about this all the time because I know that if I had to sit and look at this application all day long, I would go home with a headache. So I hope that no one's really running applications that look like this anymore. Not exactly the same application by any means, but just to give you an example, with some easy play on colors and fancy buttons and creative organizing of objects, you could easily make your application come from that old character mode day into something that's clearly a little bit more modern and functional in modern day world. So again, here's an image of the old Summit demo. Again, that application was created back in the 1990s or so, back in the day when screen size was something like 640 by 480. You probably have a laptop with a bigger display than the old monitors we used to have. So one of the problems we had back then is that you could only squeeze so much information on the screen without it, rolling off or scrolling off. So back then, it wasn't uncommon to have multiple forms for additional information. So if you couldn't fit it in one form, you pop open another form and you display the rest of the information. Although that works, it's kind of cumbersome for the end user in cases where they're in a hurry. Call centers is a perfect example. For someone who's working in a call center where time is of the essence, and they don't have time to shuffle between window and window and window, having as much information available to them at once in one place is certainly going to be a far more efficient way of doing work. This is an example of how that application was easily modified by simply just removing hard-coded colors, extending the size of the height and the width of the application, and adding some additional information in the added real estate added by resizing the form. You now have an application that even still could go much bigger than it is, but now at least it provides a significant amount of information that adds value to whatever it is that the end user is doing. And what I wanted to show here as well, talking about the inherit button earlier, by removing the hard-coded colorings from the Summit application, we now can leverage the color schemes that can be changed at runtime. So without any application code change after removing the hard-coded coloring, I can now change the look and feel of the application simply by changing an applet parameter. So we could cycle through a whole bunch of different colors that we deliver out of the box. In the future versions as we go forward, we have a plan to provide the ability to customize some of those colors. I'm sure many of you have thought about that if you're not already thinking about it. So going forward, hopefully if we're able to successfully implement that, you'll be able to customize those color schemes and you won't be restricted to what we're delivering out of the box. To give you an idea of how the color schemes work, here's kind of the breakdown. The second column there on the left that says background actually shows all the colors. Well, the first column does too, but the second column that says background does a better job of displaying how the colors work with each of the color schemes. The color schemes are actually represented by a variation of light and dark and very dark and so on. Internally, we don't reference the colors by colors. And there's a point to this. If, for example, you wanted to have the background color of a text field, use the color scheme's lightest color, you could do that. So rather than setting the background color of a text field to white, if you look at the column on the right of this slide, you could actually set the color of the background to OLAF very light. So regardless of what color scheme you're using, red, blue, teal, kiwi, whichever one you choose, the application would pick up the appropriate color that is represented by the OLAF very light. So if that color happens to be white, white would be displayed. If it's gray, gray would be displayed, and so on. So again, great ways to allow your application to change in look and feel without changing any application code after the fact. For many of you, I'm sure you're thinking, well, what in the world am I going to do with this? Who cares if I could change the color of the canvas? It doesn't add any value. Well, consider a case where you have a test environment, a production environment, and a development environment. Wouldn't it be really great if at a glance, just by looking at the colors that are presented, you could figure out what application is being run? Is that the test application? Is that the development application? Or is that production? Again, no application code change. This is all done as an applet parameter. And you can see we've cycled through a whole bunch of them here, right down to the fun ones like purple. Okay, let's continue on. So here's how we made some of the changes in the Summit demo. One of the things that I've always had a desire to see in the product was an ability to do a highlighting of the current item. Today what we have is the ability to highlight the current record with a unique color. But short of you programmatically coding it, there's really no easy way to have the current item where the cursor is highlighted. And I don't mean highlight is probably not the right word. In this particular case, the example is changing the background color. And you can see as we cycle through in this case, we could change that. So although we won't be implementing this as a new feature, what I wanted to do was show you that with just a few lines of code, we can implement that kind of functionality. And of course, this is the blue on the right is a representation of the current record visual attribute group property, which already exists. And on the bottom, we've got a pluggable Java component used to round off the buttons. But let's take a look at how we did the current item example. So again, here you could see, maybe there's 10, 15 lines of code or so to make that functionality work. Along with the code are two visual attributes, the attribute that resets the background color to whatever the default was, and the one that actually is used to set the color. In my case, I'm setting the color to that yellowy orange kind of a background. And you can see how we did that. So what we do is in the unset visual attribute, we set the colors to a default color, whatever you want to use. In my particular case, I used unspecified because I want to pick up the color scheme colors. And for the set value of the field, I chose to use OLAF 0. Remember I said you don't have to actually use a color. You could actually use a representation or a reference to one of the color scheme colors. And if you remember, OLAF 0 is that light yellow kind of a color. Okay. For the current record visual attribute, we did something similar there. You can see we created a current record visual attribute, and then in the block property, we set the background color to OLAF very light. So again, that background color would follow the color scheme color. So if it happens to be blue or purple or whatever it is, the background color would follow that theme. So it's kind of like an alternative to skinning your application. We talked about integration earlier. Again, with version 11, you have the ability to do integration with JavaScript. In the Summit demo, just kind of for fun, it started off as a little bit of a project. We added a Map It button to this address tab in the demo. And what this does is it makes a call out to the Google Maps API and launches a map relative to the address that's shown in the form. Now in this particular case, it launches a static map, meaning you can't zoom in, you cannot zoom out, you can't shift the map, etc. It's just basically a static image. And you decide at design time what you want it to look like and what features you want it to have. This particular use of the Google API does not require an account with them. Anybody could do this. So that's kind of a neat way of doing this. And here's how that's implemented. Again, in this particular case, it was implemented with JavaScript so that we could get a nice pretty pop-up window that doesn't have all the other noise around it, the browser address bar, buttons, et cetera, et cetera. It probably could be done in a variety of ways, but this seemed like the cleanest way to do it. And you can see in the code in the middle line there of the purple text, this is a call out to the Google Maps API, the static map function, and we pass in the address and what features we want it to include, and the map is displayed. Pretty easy to do, and like I said, if all you're doing is adding a button to your form, very little risk to the rest of the application as far as stability is concerned. This is all pretty self-contained. Okay. So we talked earlier about the GUI mode applet parameter, which was added in release 2 of 11. Notice on the left-hand side, this is actually a form in blue. In fact, the only reason I made it blue was so that it became obvious that it was a form. But notice that there's no window dressings. There's no menu, there's no toolbar, there's no the X to close the form or maximize, there's no icon in the top left corner, there's no status bar. Basically all you have here is the canvas. Had we have made this white, the contents of the form would more seamlessly blend into the HTML page. You would still have a light square border around the form, but that could easily be blended into the rest of the HTML application. In this particular case, we leveraged the dynamic Google mapping, which is a little bit more advanced than the static maps. Same kind of a concept. The difference here is the map is in fact dynamic. The user could adjust it. So on the left, you could see we plugged in just a city and state. We didn't include an address. And when we click on the Show Address button, it spawns off a Google map, shows us where San Francisco is, and you could see all the other options. We could switch to satellite view, and we could zoom in and zoom out. You could actually, with your mouse, slide the map around as desired. But the point of this example is how you can seamlessly plug in a form into an HTML page and gain some pretty powerful functionality. There is an ability to send, for example, latitude and longitude information back from the Google API. So if we were to move the map around, you could actually pick up the current location and theoretically send that information through JavaScript back into the form. So if you wanted to see the lat long information, you could grab that information and put it back in the form. So that's kind of neat for this one. Again, that's the GUI mode. The GUI mode feature is in 11G release 2. And then the JavaScript integration was added to 11 in general. So here's how we did that. So I mentioned that the static Google Maps do not require an account with them. However, the dynamic mapping API does. So that's what you see blocked out here on the top is my account number. But this basically is the simplified version of the code that would go into your HTML file. In the case of forms, if you were doing it with out-of-the-box functionality, this would get added to the base HTML files that we deliver, the template files. And you can see this function down here, show address, is likely the one that we're going to use. We're going to pass from forms. We're going to call the show address function and pass in the address, and Google will do the rest. And that's exactly what we do. Using JavaScript, we call the parent HTML page, we call the show address function, the JavaScript function, and we pass in the address. So it's just a couple lines of code you could integrate with Google Maps today. Okay. And then there's the GUI mode set to 3 to remove all the window dressings off. Okay. So again, like I started to imply in the beginning, the application belongs to you. It doesn't belong to Oracle. We could go version to version to version from Oracle side of it, and if you choose to have your application continue to look the same, that's entirely your choice. We have strived very diligently, I believe, to make sure that upgrading is as simple as possible and as safe as possible, which is why generally you could go from version to version, regenerate, and go, which is not true of other technologies. We want to try to avoid doing things like introducing new features that potentially are going to break your application, because if that's the case, then obviously we've put more workload onto you, and that doesn't make sense. We want to introduce new features in a smart way so that you could use them optionally and not be forced to use them. So take advantage of some of the new stuff that's out there. So let's go forward. I know you're waiting for this. So here's some of the stuff at a high level, what we're hoping to do.
What's important to say, Michael, is that everything you've shown till now is existing already, because I'm getting questions here that people cannot even imagine. Guys, everything that Michael already previewed is not look and feel project. It's not fancy Java beans. It's Oracle Forms features, native. So if anybody needs help getting this done, you could feel free to reach out to us, support@oraplayer.com for examples of code. But all of you should be implementing these features already, basically.
Right. So there's certainly been an enormous amount of effort to deliver the message over the years that modernization is key in keeping the product going forward. Not just your application, the product as well. The popularity that the product has has a direct bearing on what new functionality we put into it. So if popularity fades, the likelihood is we're not going to put a whole lot of effort into it. But as we see that there's interest in it, we're going to deliver more and more. And that's what you're going to see in version 12. We're going to deliver a lot in version 12 compared to the previous versions. But as Mia just said, you already have an enormous toolbox already sitting at your desk. So take advantage of what we have and come along with us incrementally, and your application won't get outdated looking. Okay? So going forward, for what you don't have today, what we want to do, as I mentioned earlier, is I want to make sure that your ability to be productive is improved, whether it's at design time or run time or anywhere in between, the administration of the application. So the first thing I want to do is something we haven't done in a very long time. I want to look at the builder. I don't want to see us rebuild the builder from scratch, because that would mean sending you back to school and having to learn how to use a brand new tool, and that doesn't make a whole lot of sense from an efficiency point of view. But what I want to do is improve the tool working with what we have, and I believe it could be done. We've done a significant number of improvements going into the next version, and we're already prototyping stuff for the version beyond 12. So productivity improvements for the builder is a big one. We talked about applet parameters like GUI mode, which you already have. Going forward, we're going to add more and more applet parameters like that will allow you to adjust the look and feel of the application without having to recode your application. This could be done by an administrator. Security features is always important to us. We're looking at some really cool new security features. I won't dwell on that one. Performance and diagnosability of JVM controllers. If you do forms and reports integration or have server-side Java or imported Java in your forms application, you should already be using the JVM controllers. That was introduced in version 10. That will help to reduce the memory usage on the server side. If you're not familiar with the JVM controller, I encourage you to take a look at the deployment guide. Again, it's only of value if you're using integration with reports or you have imported Java in your form. We're looking at record manager improvements, specifically those that will help us to reduce memory usage on the server side. This isn't going to be too valuable for everyone, but for organizations where your data blocks are returning large amounts of records, thousands, millions, whatever the number is, or the contents of those records is sizable, the record manager improvements we're looking at are going to help you there on the server side. New system events, I mentioned earlier, we already support advanced queuing. That's considered an external event. Similar to that external event, we're going to add support for what we're going to call system events, things like client idle time, database idle time, and a variety of others. We're going to give you the ability to take control over those events that occur. Improved integration with single sign-on. Currently today, Forms is not a true partner app, and in simple terms what that means is basically we log on and forget it. Once we log into single sign-on, that's it. We have no integration with single sign-on anymore. So that means if you log out of single sign-on, your form will continue to operate just as if single sign-on wasn't there in the first place. In the versions going forward, we're going to give you programmatic control over what you do if a single sign-out event occurs. If you want to continue running the form, that's entirely up to you. If you want to log out, that's entirely up to you. If you want to pop up a message, you'll code that. Whatever the case is, we're going to give you control over what you do with a single sign-off event. Diagnostic features, we always improve with each new version, whether it's just changing the terminology in a message or improving the way we do tracing. We've got a lot of new features lined up for diagnostics. New deployment features, this is specific to the client side. With so much discussion around the Java plugin and the different browser versions and so on and so forth, we made a decision to offer more than just that one option of delivering. Today, your only option is to deliver an HTML page to the client, which spawns an integrated Java plugin in the browser, and it runs your form. Going forward, we're looking at introducing at least 3 new options, one of which will be a browserless option. No browser. You will still have Java on the client, but there will not be a browser, which means we will not use the Java plugin. You'll still need a JDK installed on the machine, but it won't be the plugin component that we'll be using to run that. So potentially 4 new options or variations of what we deliver. I know I've been asked about WebStart several times, which is similar to a browserless solution, but not entirely. We are planning to introduce WebStart as well as embedded JNLP. So basically, it'll be a hybrid between HTML and WebStart. So we've got a lot of cool stuff coming there. For new installation options, we're looking at a builder-only option. I've had a lot of mixed feedback on this one already. Some are really happy about it. Some can't understand why in the world we would do it. But basically what this means is we're going to deliver a form builder-only option, meaning there won't be a runtime. So for everyone who says, oh, this is ridiculous, I don't want to have to install WebLogic Server on my laptop, it's too fat, now you won't have to. The downside is you won't have a runtime, but it will give you the ability to work in the builder, manage your code, make changes, write new code, use all the utilities like the converting tools and so on and so forth. And then you could just deploy your resulting form out on a centralized server or alternative machine, or a different installation on the same machine. That's entirely up to you. We've been asked about Oracle Cloud. At the moment, we do not offer any forms component in the cloud. However, we are investigating some possibilities and trying to decide how we want to deliver those options, if possible at all. So kind of stay tuned for that, and we'll see where we go with that. So let's take a look at some of the stuff we've prototyped. So again, I mentioned that we were looking at builder changes. Again, if anyone has a builder open in front of them, take a look at the layout editor, draw a button or a text field on it, and attempt to resize it. Notice that the mouse pointer remains the same left-pointing mouse cursor that you see all the time when you're not doing anything. What we're going to do is add the appropriate sizing and movement cursors to the layout editor so that you don't accidentally move a button when you meant to resize it, or accidentally resize it when you meant to move it. So that hopefully will help to avoid some oopses along the way. In an effort to offer everyone what they've asked me for several times, which is easier access to the product documentation, we've now expanded out the Builder's Help menu. So not only can you get to the Oracle Technology Network and the Builder Help, you're now going to be able to have direct access to the Oracle Forms OTN forums, as well as the documentation library. Historically, the documentation library consisted of mostly the runtime documents, install guides, deployment guides, etc. But we're looking at potentially adding the Builder Help to the documentation library as well. We're still investigating the possibility of doing that, but that is certainly something we're considering. So better access to documentation. The XML Converter, again, becoming more and more popular, although not entirely the most popular feature we have. Introduced in version 10, the XML Converter allows you to take a forms binary file, an FMB, for example, and turn it into XML. Great for source control systems. It can be used for editing. However, I will tell you that generally speaking, we are not going to support you doing that. It's just not a good plan at the moment. Mostly because there's too much risk of you making a typographical mistake in it. Right? There's no validation of that XML. At least in the builder, if you make a code change, the compiler will catch that mistake and correct it. With XML, if you make a typo in it, you're going to end up with a mess. So we don't recommend you editing the XML files, but they are definitely valuable for doing things like source control, storage. An XML file is going to zip up much smaller than an FMB will, and so on and so forth. So we're going to implement or integrate this into the builder. Currently, it's a command line only tool. WebUtil. Currently today, you're required to have a third-party open source library included with your deployment if you use WebUtil, regardless of whether or not you use it. We're going to deliver a new WebUtil Object Library, which includes an option that removes the OLA component so that the third-party open source library is not required. Unfortunately, there's no way for us to change your existing applications. You would have to manually make the change yourself if that's the case. If you do continue to use OLA, in other words, as an example, integration with the Microsoft Office tools, you will continue to need Jacob you will not be able to overcome that dependency. I mentioned system events earlier. Here's an example of some of the ones we're going to include. The first one, the database event, is the advanced queuing event I mentioned earlier. User-defined will not, or at least at the moment, is not planned to be used, although it is listed there. Client idle time should be self-explanatory. Effectively, you set an amount of idle time you want your application to be aware of. If the application is idle for that amount of time, an event is fired, and again, you decide what you want to do as a result of that firing. Database idle time, same concept. Single sign-off, I mentioned earlier that if a single sign-off event occurs, what do you want to do? That's how you're going to handle it. System notification is a cool new feature that I would tend to categorize as a diagnostic tool. However, it doesn't need to be used that way. What that is intended to be used for, or the way it will function, is in the Enterprise Manager, you'll find a button with a drop-down that offers several notification levels, we'll call it. Let's say notification 1, notification 2, notification 3. And you'll be able to send that notification to the running form session. You could send them to all the sessions or one session or whichever ones you choose to select. What will happen on the form side is a system notification event will fire, and you decide again what you want to do at that point. So here's a use case for you. Your server is going to be shut down in 15 minutes, and you want to make sure that all the users save their work and exit. So you send a message from Enterprise Manager out to all the users, and it pops up a message on the form side of all the running users that says, system will be going down in 15 minutes. Please save your work and exit the application immediately. Okay. System media completion. Hopefully that one's self-explanatory. The plan at the moment is we're going to reintroduce audio support. That was something we had back in the client-server days. Due to some technical limitations, we had to remove it when we went to web. However, we're going to introduce a little bit of a variation of it going forward. The initial release is planned to not be part of the record manager, meaning in this initial release you will not be able to store the audio files in the database. They will have to be picked up from the file system. So again, picking a use case as an example, if, for example, you wanted to have audible online help, where maybe the online help is read out loud, or maybe a welcome message, or any other information that typically is static, doesn't change, you might want to do that. Or maybe you just want to have a startup song play when your application starts, kind of like Microsoft Windows does. I don't know, something along those lines. Okay. We don't plan on making too many widget changes at the moment. However, we did make at least this one at the moment. Currently on a tab canvas, the labels are text only. Going forward, we're planning on including the ability to include images. In this example, I added some ugly little dots, so probably not a great example. But certainly you could add more functional icons in there that are appropriate for whatever the tabs are. So that's kind of a nice little change. We talked about changes to security. This may not necessarily be deemed a security change, but definitely is helpful in the area of security. Currently, you have no way to modify the Logon dialog box or the change password dialog box. Our goal is to introduce this feature that will allow you to add up to 255 single-byte characters to this dialog box, where you might want to include things like rules or helpful information. For example, to let the user know that all of the fields are case sensitive, or maybe in a change password field or change password dialog box, you might want to explain what the new database rules are for username and password. For example, you must have letters, numbers, special characters, et cetera, et cetera. In the text below these boxes, you'll see that I actually counted out the characters for each of the sentences I included, just to give you an idea of how much room 255 characters really is. The best example is the change password dialog box, where of the 255 characters, I only used 210 and offered a pretty significant rule there. So I still had quite a lot more I could have included explaining that out. Okay, so lots and lots of new features still coming. Like I said, we're anticipating having probably more new features in this next release than we've had in the past 3 releases combined. Going forward beyond the next release, I already have a list twice as long as my current list for new features beyond 12. So there's lots of new stuff coming. If anyone has questions, comments, Any tips that you'd like to offer for new features, thinking about some of the points that I made. We don't want to reinvent the builder, for example. Please, by all means, share those ideas with me, because for some of you that have shared ideas, when we roll out the next version, you're going to see that some of those ideas were actually introduced, and you could maybe take credit for them. So what I want to do is just take a quick glance at some of the contact information and a reminder of some of the locations of technical information. So of course, the most valuable information you're going to get is on the Forms product page on OTN. From there, you could find links to the product documentation all the way back to version 10. In fact, in some cases, we have version 6 information, including white papers, the product documentation, certification. We've included things like customer stories, where you'll find stories about, for example, Mia's product OraPlayer, as well as some of our other partners like PITS and Renaps, and some of the work that they've done with our customers. Also on that page, there's some tutorials. Although they haven't been updated in quite a long time, we are looking at updating those as well. There's downloads to the software, downloads to some of the older demos, which we're also looking at revisiting. And then one of the unofficial things that we've done here is we've created a Twitter account. That Twitter account is monitored by me. I will tell you that it is, again, unofficial. So your first source of truth should be the Forms product page. And then if you're looking for immediate information, potentially as conferences are underway or so on and so forth, Twitter is probably going to be a helpful way to go. I will tell you that when I do attend the conferences, whether it's ODTUG or Open World or any other one around the world, I try to share what's going on at that conference through Twitter, just because it's convenient, and for people that happen to be at the show as well, they could kind of follow. For example, hey, my session starts in 20 minutes, come see us in room 26 or whatever. Okay.
Great. So thank you so much, Michael, for that amazing drill down. I'm really energized by a lot of the features that you've been discussing. There's actually a lot of questions. I don't know if we're going to have a chance to answer them all in this session. Another thing, I want to apologize. I know that a lot of people were trying to enter and couldn't enter, and some people entered and were bumped off. We were way over capacity. I think over 150 people were trying to attend and getting bumped off. So hopefully Michael will agree to maybe do a second session for those who missed, and we've also recorded the session, and that will be made available on OraPlayer's website. So Michael, if you want to go down and answer some of the questions that sound a little more all-encompassing, such as questions regarding support. For instance, will it be possible to integrate Oracle Forms client inside a Java application?
I'm not sure I understand that one. So the delivery of the Forms application will remain kind of the same that it is today. So as I mentioned, you could either programmatically integrate it with a web page or visually integrate it in a web page. So that's an option. I'm not sure I understand the question specifically, though.
Okay. Next is, could Forms 12c benefit from coherence or RAC?
Two different things. So from a coherence point of view, we do not expose or leverage any of the functionality provided by coherence. So unfortunately, no. Currently, coherence really is not going to benefit you much in any way at all with Forms.
Right, that's what I thought. Rather disappointed by the message given. I don't know what that was. What about Windows Server 2012 R2?
I'm glad you asked. So we are looking at an updated certification for release 11, 11G R2. The plan at the moment is that it should include Windows 2012 Release 2, Windows 8.1, and then a few Unix platforms as well. So we do have updates coming for that, and of course, version 12 of Forms will automatically pick those up as well. So that is in the works. Again, no guarantee. We have to get through the quality testing, and if testing is completed successfully, then we'll release those updates soon.
There's also a question here about Java 8 support, because Java 7 support is going off the charts around May, they said.
Yep. So Java 8 actually on the client side, so the Java plugin version 8 is already supported with Forms 11 Release 2, very specifically 11.1.2.2. So you could already use Java 8 there. On the server side, version 11 will never, very likely never support Java 8 on the server. For version 12, the expectation is we'll be building and delivering with Java 8 on both tiers.
Right. And then there's another support question about Windows 10 with Oracle Forms. Project Spark in Windows 10.
Right. So for Windows 10 or any other future operating system, generally we do not do any testing on pre-release or beta version. Often we will not even begin our testing until minimum of 6 months after the release of those new versions. So we're not even really looking forward at Windows 10 yet. Regarding Spartan, which is Microsoft's alternative browser, I guess we're going to call it, again, as I mentioned, we're planning to offer a browserless deployment option. So that likely will be the interim solution for those spaces. So what browser Microsoft decides to deliver probably won't even matter because we won't be using one.
Okay, great. What about resizing the window? This is a huge one that I get a lot from our customers, which is, based on the resolution. Is this an option that's going to be available to tailor the window size and the application size to the resolution?
Right. So that's actually kind of a I guess it's just not a good comparison that often gets made. So a lot of times I have customers that they take a web page and they stretch the browser out and they say, look, all of the fields stretch as I stretch the browser. Forms is not an HTML page. It's a Java application. Could the fields be made to adjust with the Windows side? Probably. However, we're not in the position to deliver that. The way the architecture and the model works internally, we have a strong dependency on the XY coordinates of each object, and resizing and shuffling them around and figuring out how each item should be adjusted as the window resizes is something that we just don't want to do. We just feel like it's going to cause too much network traffic and destroy performance. I will tell you that there are some Java beans out there as demos that offer that functionality, and I can tell you that having tried some of them, they do exactly what I just described, which is hurt performance. So it's not really a good idea to do that kind of functionality in a Forms application.
Okay, great. So most of the other questions, we're getting towards the end of our time. So I will have them sent over to you to address individually because they're kind of on specific features and bug fixes of particular people.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. What?
I was going to say, let's make one final comment just before we go. Just a reminder for any of you that are in the U.S. or travel from other countries. In June, the OTN event is going to be held down in South Florida. I encourage you guys that have the opportunity to come see that, to come check us out. We'll be out there. I have at least one session planned for that show. I know Mia has several sessions to discuss forms and mobility and OraPlayer. Take the time to come say hello to us, come shake our hands, and come see what's going on. We should have a lot of new stuff by then.
Great. Thank you all for joining us. And as I said, we're going to be sending out a link with access to this recorded session, and we will try to arrange a second session for people who were unable to connect. In case anybody in your organization was unable to connect today. Thank you very much, and thank you once again, Michael, for all your hard work in getting us these amazing new features.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.